Viewers, the Trump government has pulled out all the stops, it would appear, to make Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit a memorable one in what is being described as an unprecedented gesture of solidarity. Trump has announced he will be flying into Houston to share a stage with India's Prime Minister as they both meet and greet 50,000 cheering Indians at the Howdy Modi event. Now, this is how the White House has described the meeting in Houston. They've come out and called it a path-breaking, historic event that will only cement the relationship. Let me quote them exactly. President Trump will travel to Houston to underscore important partnerships between US and India. That's how the White House described it. The event, Howdy Modi, Shared Dreams, Bright Futures, is expected to draw thousands of people. And then the White House statement continues to say, it will be a great opportunity to emphasize the strong ties between the people of US and India. The Indian side has come out and said that this is once again an affirmation. White House comes out and says it will also reaffirm the strategic partnership between the world's oldest and largest democracies. And it's quite an elaborate statement being made by the White House. President Trump, of course, made the announcement himself, rather casually, but that really is his style. Let's listen in to what he had said.
You will be addressing 50,000 people along with Prime Minister Modi in Houston next weekend. What is the message you're sending to the world?
So I'll see Prime Minister Modi, and I think a lot of progress has been made there. A lot of progress.
Now, at this point, let's quickly take a very fast check on the backstory by asking some basic questions. I mean, very basic questions. Should we be surprised that Trump and Modi have come to share what appears to be great chemistry when so many other world leaders have found the US president unpredictable and temperamental? That's the baseline question. Let me throw this open tonight. We're joined by Jay Panda, National Spokesperson of the Bharatiya Janata Party, Amy Kaisman of the Financial Times. Also with us, Christine Fair, Provost, Distinguished Associate Professor, Georgetown University, Indrani Bagchi, Diplomatic Editor, Times of India, Bharat Karnad, Research Professor, CPR and National Security Expert. Also with us, K.C. Singh, been with the government, former secretary. Nice to have all of you on the channel this evening. Let me begin first with Amy Kaisman. Amy, it is quite the relationship, isn't it? This bromance that has been blossoming. Many people see this as being a little uncharacteristic because Trump is a strangely unpredictable, temperamental person. Is this expected?
Well, look, I mean, bromance may be uncharacteristic for Trump, but in fact, we have seen that Modi has had a number of bromances with world leaders. So he really does cultivate his relationships. We've heard of the bromance with Shinzo Abe and, you know, Vladimir Putin, and there's all, I mean, Modi does really invest a lot in his personal relationships with leaders. I think it's important to remember that when Trump goes to Houston next week, on Sunday, and is at this huge rally, you describe the people as Indians, but in fact, many of the 50,000 people in that stadium may well be Indian Americans, i.e. Indian American voters that Trump is eyeing in a swing state and may think that going there and courting this kind of very cohesive vote bank with a show of solidarity for a leader that the Indian diaspora feels very strongly about is quite good politics for his own domestic purposes.
Indrani Bagchi.
Well, I think we've seen over the past 6 years that Mr. Modi does invest in his personal relationships. It is I wouldn't call it a bromance, actually. I think Mr. Modi is far more calculating as a world leader for that, and so is Trump. no matter, regardless of what people say. I think it is basically two world leaders recognizing the partnerships and recognizing the convergences of their countries at this particular point.
So Trump, who prides himself as being quite the deal maker, is actually seeing benefit in this relationship, K.C. Singh, because there's an election in the not so distant future. Invest now, invest wisely. You'll pick up some great traction from an influential section of American society, i.e. the Indian American voter.
Look, first thing we must recognize is that there is the basic upward dynamics of Indo-US relations. And it's not of recent origin. It started way back in 91, had a dip in 98 when we did the nuclear tests, and then it's been upward since then. Say between Prime Minister Manmohan Singh and Obama, there was an intellectual connect, and that was a factor of the personalities of the two leaders. Here, both are theatrical, both like a certain degree of drama and immediacy to their connection, and so it's gone straight to another dimension, which is theatrical, large, involving the community. So I don't think it's simply votes. Obama would also be seeking whatever he wants from India in terms of trade, in terms of defense deals, in terms of the stumbling blocks. If you remember, the last time the two interacted, the only 2 points that President Trump mentioned, that he talked of defense and he talked of trade. And trade discussions are taking place as we have this program, and they are still stumbling blocks. So what is it which you will give to Trump which will satisfy him on trade and he stops pushing you? But the final dimension I must mention is that, much as we may not like to mention it, the Kashmir shadow is there over the visit. Because outside the meeting point, there will be demonstrations by people, by maybe Pakistan-inspired people, by other people, which will bring up the Kashmir issue. There is already pressure, equal pressure being put on US Congress. US Congress is already asking questions. So there is a shadow there. Now, how it impinges on the visit, we don't know.
Okay.
One of the Democrats mentions it, doesn't mention it, it gets mentioned outside. So somewhere in the background, that play is there.
Right.
But definitely this is taking the relationship to another level. Okay. But please remember, the Netanyahu-Trump relationship was even thicker. And after Netanyahu has lost, Trump has not even called him in the last 3 days. So remember, much of it is play acting, but essentially the relationships are always between countries.
I'll come back to this, the Kashmir allusion that you just made, because that's an important one. Christine Fair, is this effort that Trump is making beyond the transactional, if one were to go by what K.C. Singh is suggesting, indicative that India's profile under Modi has grown dramatically in American eyes, and that more than ever before, Washington is prepared to invest, perhaps, in this relationship?
So let me go back first to what Amy Kazmin said, which I don't think your viewers necessarily appreciate. So there have been, all across the United States, very prominent Republicans declining to recontest their elections in 2020. And one of those constituencies is, guess what, right there in Houston. Representative Pete Olson, his seat is very much under pressure from progressive Democrats, and he opted to not contest this election in 2020. So if you don't appreciate the nuances of swing states and the particular seats that are under pressure, it may not seem obvious why President Trump would want to come to Houston and do what he can do to support local Republican candidates. So that cannot be ruled out. But there is the larger issue that Mr. Singh raised, and that is that the U.S.-India relationship is in some ways, it's structurally determined by the ever more convergent security interests between the two countries. I think from the United States perspective, and I may not share this, I'm simply explaining it, President Trump has really fetishized trade, and he has been very much irked by the Indian purchase of Russian missiles. And he doesn't have a lot of understanding or patience for the fact that India is, for the policy relevant future with respect to defense acquisitions, is still going to be overly dependent upon Russia, because it takes a very long time to change the defense basis of a country. So I think that his showing up at the Howdy Modi event both reflects the importance that Indian Americans rightly deserve because of their numbers and their influence. It is the wealthiest Indian diaspora in the world. But I also believe that President Trump is most certainly thinking about local Republican fortunes in a state that's come under pressure from Democrats.
Okay, that's an interesting and comprehensive point of view. And I want to bring in both Jay Panda and Bharat Karnad on this. Jay Panda, over to you first. Transactional, short-term investment by Trump, looking at elections and the dynamics, or there is something greater to this?
There is definitely something greater to this, and in answer to your question of should we be surprised, no, we shouldn't be surprised for the following 4 reasons. As the late Prime Minister Vajpayee ji pointed out 2 decades ago, that India and America are natural allies. They are the world's 2 largest democracies with many shared values. And Ambassador K.C. Singh is right that over the past 2 decades, the relationship has been getting closer and closer. Second, on both the economic front and the geopolitical front, India's renaissance and growth matters to the world. And here again, America and India have shared many common visions and are working together on both the geopolitical front and on the economic front. For example, we've had a huge growth in foreign direct investment, and many American companies are at the forefront of that, such as Amazon setting up its largest global center here in Hyderabad now. Third point, both are larger-than-life leaders. And Prime Minister Modi in particular has been doing this, has been enthusing the Indian diaspora in America, in the UK, and in other parts of the world for more than 5 years, and has been tapping into their huge potential. And that brings me to my 4th and final point. As Christine Fair was saying, the Indian diaspora, the Pravasi Indians, are extremely influential in America. Their family household income is right at the very top. Their numbers are large. And over the last 2 decades, I have personally seen how Indian Americans have gotten involved in politics in the US. Unlike other, for example, many Chinese Americans are not that involved in the politics, perhaps because of our experience here of being a large democracy and many other countries not having had that democratic experience. So Indian Americans have become major donors, fundraisers, and a lot of staff positions on the Capitol Hill and in government offices in the US are held by Indian Americans. So it would be only natural if President Trump would want to leverage that both for his governmental objectives as well as his party objectives.
Okay, Bharat Karnad, are we overemphasizing the durability and the naturalness of the alliance or association or what have you?
Yeah, I think let me emerge as the skeptic here. There are 2 things. The convergence that everybody is talking about is really more notional than anything else. In substantive terms, there's just a slight overlap of interests, geostrategic and otherwise. And in terms of the traits of the 2 leaders, both of them are not just transactional, but they use whatever means are available in a situational sense to further their immediate interests as they see it. Just the other day, Prime Minister Modi, in a TV interview, made clear the fact that while he uses, he lets his heart prevail over his head, as he put it, and he uses personal chemistry. When he sits down across the table, he uses only his head. It's not very different from Trump. So when you talk about America investing in India and so on and so forth, there's a lot of hot air. The fact of the matter is that Trump doesn't invest in anybody except in himself. Now look at how he wants something out of North Korea, and therefore he's, cozying up with Kim Jong-un. Or look at his relations with Putin. He wants something. He wants something of Modi. And that something is, basically when you talk about military cooperation, security cooperation, he wants India to buy more hardware. Very simple. There's no great design there to further any security architecture, anything of the kind. It's just India's trying to buy F-16 that is trying to push, or the staple procurement items that are the C-130s and P-8Is, or some such thing that we off-take every now and then to keep Trump happy. So this is the kind of very transactional mindset both the two leaders are, hardwired with. So to expect to endow this with something other than what it is, a relationship, a meeting where both are very calculating, has been said,
okay,
but calculating in terms of their immediate payoffs.
Right.
And that's what both are looking at.
So let's not invest this relationship with a halo of idealism. That's perhaps what, or emotional,
you can have it as rhetoric, but not to believe in it too much.
Okay, well, we've had the opening comments. Now let's get into some of the issues. There are sticking points. So far, we've kind of walked around them a little bit. There's the trade imbalance. There is, of course, the big tariff war that is looming between the two countries. There's the ties with Russia, especially, I think someone on the panel mentioned arms purchases, which are irritating Mr. Trump and perhaps the American defense industry. The Iran test, US has sanctioned Iranian oil exports, calling that a terror state. They've held India to ransom on that issue. We're a bit upset about that. There's, of course, Pakistan and Kashmir, always the elephant in the room, Indrani Bagchi. And there's the H-1B visas issue, which ties in, in an election year with Mr. Trump's anti-immigration stand. So I want to bring you in, and let's get into the details. Someone raised Kashmir. I think it was Mr. Singh. Let's get into Kashmir. Now, many people will see this, bonhomie, as Mr. Singh has said, in the backdrop of this, issue in Kashmir.
That's right.
Now, by showing up, and a lot of people have had reservations, and some of them have decided to stay away, in fact, from this particular big meeting. Now, by showing up, is the American state tacitly endorsing Modi's actions and his government's actions in Kashmir?
I think you can even go back to the first statement that the US made, which said that they were giving Modi the room when they described it as an internal issue. And till date, I have not seen, yes, there are personal misgivings, yes, there have been statements from Congress persons and from people of other parties, but from the state itself, as in from the administration, I think there has been support for Mr. Modi's actions. And yes, I would say that it will be seen as an endorsement, not an endorsement, but that they won't criticize him for it, as long as Mr. Modi retains control of the process that he has started out in Kashmir. If that goes out of control, I don't think you will get the same level of endorsement or support from the US.
Okay, do you agree with that assessment, Amy Kasman?
Yeah, I think maybe the U.S. government and its, or the administration wouldn't necessarily have been utterly thrilled that this thing has happened because it's a big distraction. They definitely don't want to see a rise in tensions between India and Pakistan. But I think they accept the notion that this is, an internal matter of India in terms of the abrogation itself of Article 370. And even the overturning of the ban on foreigners buying property, I think you would find that the administration will, accept the kind of legitimacy of that argument that this is kind of India's internal affair. What I think the concern is about is actually the measures that have accompanied the constitutional change. So while you can say it's our internal affair to kind of get rid of this, this law and this constitutional provision, I think there is unease unease with, the continued communications blackout on 8 million people who still don't have mobile phones or internet. I think there is unease with the kind of widespread roundups of people who just yesterday or not so long ago were cabinet ministers and chief ministers of the state of Jammu and Kashmir who haven't had, who've not been formally accused of any crime or involvement in militancy. So I think that the issue of the abrogation is understood and reasonably accepted as India's internal matter, but I think the extent of the clampdown has generated some unease.
Christine Fair, on that point, international consensus tends to disincentivize interference in the internal affairs of countries. Is the United States simply following that trajectory that we've seen up till now, even within the United Nations most often? Or is mediation and other googlies being temporarily put aside by Mr. Trump because he has, as you've said, an election to fight and he doesn't want too many enemies at this moment?
So I think we have to see that bizarre meeting with Imran Khan where he lied, saying that Modi had asked him to intervene, as a genuine blip in recent U.S. historical positions towards Kashmir. While I do not believe the official position has been altered, that this is seen as a bilateral dispute, going back to at least 2016, you can trace out a very distinct change in U.S. rhetoric. It went from a traditional repine of, we encourage both sides to settle outstanding issues peacefully through dialogue, to we support India's right to self-defense. So I actually view Trump's unusual offer to intervene as the exception, not the rule. And I think this is where the deep state and the tweet state clash. After he made these most inappropriate statements, I think there was very likely a significant effort to educate him. And that's why the issue has not arisen again.
Casey Singh, buried forever, this mediation googly that was spun by Mr. Trump?
No, it's come up again. It's come up twice. But he moderates it by saying if both of them invite me to intervene, but he does keep stating it. And don't forget...
Which is going back to the Clinton years.
Yeah, he has a great penchant for this mediation, and he thinks if Obama got a Nobel Prize, why shouldn't he? He likes to fashion himself as a great mediator who can handle disputes. Having come from business, he thinks these are like business disputes, and he's a great resolver of disputes. So he steps in without consulting anyone. But I think on this, he realizes that you can't go in too hard and too fast. But I think the distinction which has already been, let me note that even Pakistan began by going hard at the abrogation of Articles 370 and 35A.
Yeah.
But they realized there were no takers for it. They've also very quickly changed from that to the situation in the valley. That's why Prime Minister Imran Khan went from threatening nuclear war to calling on Pakistanis to stand out in protest, stand out in open, etc., etc. They realized that the test now is how quickly can India restore normalcy to the valley. And I think that is also what is making people, India's friends in the P5 abroad, nervous, that they will support you, but they cannot keep ignoring if this situation is not normal sooner than later. And I think that is the danger. And what is happening is that when you create such hype around an event like in Houston, then you're actually inviting the Kashmir issue to the street outside, and therefore the focus will return to that. If Prime Minister had just gone to the UN, exchanged blows with the Pakistani Prime Minister and come back, you wouldn't have had the Indo-Pak dispute get to the streets in US. But now if you have people, unfortunately, people supporting Khalistan will be there, Pakistanis will be there, ISI will be feeding it. So you've allowed this dispute now to be outside the venue, half a kilometer away or a kilometer away, where freedom of expression allows them to demonstrate. And it'll be again there outside the UN when PM is speaking. So to that extent, I think without not having been able to quickly open up the valley, allow some dissent and allow normalcy to return, you have now allowed it to the streets in US, which is not a good thing.
But is that new?
If
I mean,
I
the
may.
Prime Minister has been there. Okay, Christine Fair wants to quickly come into that.
Yeah,
Yes.
very quickly. So I'm really glad that Ambassador Singh raised this issue. The convergence of the Khalistanis and the Kashmiris, not only in the United States, but also the United Kingdom and Europe, facilitated by the ISI, is a very worrisome development. But I will point out that even had the event in Kashmir not happened, we would see those demonstrations because we saw them before Article 370.
Yeah.
They are organized, they are subsidized by the ISI. And so I don't, from my point of view, what has happened in the Valley doesn't really affect these demonstrations. They are driven by a long-standing desire by the ISI to facilitate these kinds of protests. We would have seen it no matter what.
Well, I remember when Mr. Jayapanda, and I don't know if you were at any time focusing on that, but when Modi went for the first time to the United States when he got elected, and he had that bilateral with Obama, you know, there was this new sort of bonhomie that was charted. We saw the Sikh federations, we saw Khalistanis, we saw Kashmiri groups, we saw Pakistani groups, etc., coming out and protesting. But the question I want to get at really is the interesting road the Prime Minister is taking. We know Imran Khan is going to address the United Nations General Assembly, and he said, look, I am going to make my address about Kashmir and what India is doing in Kashmir. The Prime Minister let it be known through the MEA yesterday that we are taking the moral high road. In fact, that's a story Times Now broke 2 nights ago, saying that there will be no mention of Pakistan or any of its rhetorical responses on some of the issues with relations to Kashmir, cross-border terrorism, etc., etc. Do you believe that's the right way, or should Prime Minister use the UN forum to address that square on?
Well, first of all, let me put this in the context that the only nation that wants to increase tensions with India is Pakistan. The only nation that does not believe that Article 370 abrogation was an internal matter of India is Pakistan, and that is understandable. It's understandable because their balloon has been punctured. There was no need for India to have entertained Pakistan at any time in the last 72 years because Jammu and Kashmir acceded to India under the same circumstances and rules as for all the other princely states. And despite having agreed in the Shimla Agreement, if Pakistan has kept on trying to internationalize the situation, it's understandable. And Christine Fair is exactly right that there is no reason for us to believe that if we had kept a low profile, somehow these protests would have stopped. And there is no reason for India to keep a low profile. We are within our legal rights, our constitutional rights. And for the Prime Minister to take the high road in the UN is, I think, exactly right, because there is no need for him to lower himself to the level of Imran Khan, who is the Prime Minister of a country that goes around with a begging bowl in one hand and a nuclear weapon in the other hand, threatening self and destruction of self and neighbors. So the Prime Minister is doing the right thing by taking the high road. The reality is, the situation in Jammu and Kashmir has been improving. I think it's pretty remarkable and a good thing that a month and a half on, there has been no serious violence, and you've had terrorists kill shopkeepers for daring to open their stores, but restrictions have gradually been released. There are cell phone signals available in Jammu, and as the winter sets in from October onwards, perhaps the atmosphere will be conducive to breathing a little easier and easing further restrictions.
Okay.
So I think the road ahead has lot of potential for India to prove that this has been managed well.
Okay, Mr. Karnad, on that point, Mr. Panda seems to suggest we have nothing to be defensive about on Kashmir. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, but there is no need. I mean, I don't understand this high road business.
Okay.
If it's an internal matter, where is the high road? Where's the moral high road? I mean, I don't understand. Unless you're trying to ride a moral hobby horse somewhere, that's not present in the issue. You are saying it's an internal affair, and it is. All you have done is removed an offensive article of the Constitution legally, and so what's there to be defensive about? The other thing is...
Well, the Pakistanis would say, and some groups in India would say, the manner in which we have gone about imposing curbs, not seeking the opinion of a wide cross-section of Kashmiri intelligentsia and the political class, and also putting these very restrictive curbs is something to be defensive about.
No,
because it suggests that you're inimical to the very language of human rights and freedoms.
No, but you see, human rights is a factor of political correctness of the modern age.
Okay.
It has no really a play on nation building, and this is basically nation building. And let's be very clear what it is. You know, to go on and on about human rights in a situation where, okay, let's talk of the social reality in Jammu and Kashmir, and particularly the Srinagar Valley. Just 10 days ago, there was recruitment for the Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. There was a crowd. The army could not accommodate the kind of recruitment surge that was there from the very valley Muslims who actually, are filling the ranks of the Jack-Ally regiments. Now, how do you square the two? The point of the matter is this, that if given the opportunity, and this is what the Prime Minister and the government has promised, you're going to open up the economy, you're going to mainstream Kashmir into the national economy, there'll be more opportunities for everybody to grow rich and prosperous, and things will happen. Now, one other thing, you see, when you when Pakistan talks about whatever Imran is going to talk about, because he follows our Prime Minister to the podium at the UNGA, the Indian Prime Minister cannot talk in anticipation of what Imran is going to say.
Okay.
That defeats the whole purpose. So let him just go on and talk about whatever it is he wants to, and not mention the Kashmir issue.
Fair enough.
But the other thing is, how is Imran's going to harp on genocide? I mean, does he even understand what genocide is? Shouldn't he refer to the dictionary? I mean, English dictionary for one thing, and perhaps the Pakistan Foreign Office can help him do that. He's after all a cricketer, perhaps doesn't understand the English language as well. But this is the problem. Genocide, you reduce your credibility right there. Genocide is happening in Xinjiang. It's happening in Tibet. It's not happening in Kashmir, for God's sake.
Okay.
No, you get the right to respond in any case after him.
You do.
And usually you send a junior diplomat to do it, to add insult to injury. So we'll probably have a first secretary go and respond.
In the past few years, we've sent Sushma Swaraj. She's addressed, and she's been much more. I'm talking about in the past 2 years, we've had Sushma Swaraj actually making some very strident points against Pakistan. Okay, look, when we're quickly, not to get bogged down by Pakistan, but while we're at it, and we're talking about the Indo-American relationship, now, one other sticking point tends to be how America continues to, in some ways or the other, bankroll Pakistan to some extent. And that upsets India. And some people have said that Trump is going to leverage everything he has with Imran Khan and Pakistan because of the Afghanistan factor. Now, till this Afghanistan factor doesn't play out to the satisfaction of the Americans, can we expect this relationship to be properly and entirely dehyphenated?
Well, so look at where the Afghanistan story is today. I mean, you could have made this argument a month ago, but given the fact that President Trump himself cancelled the negotiations.
About time.
And correctly, about time, and a wise thing to do, even if it was a late one. But the fact is that Pakistan's losing that leverage every day. Pakistan could have made a better case for itself, its own geopolitical space or its geographical centerpiece, as a centerpiece to the Afghan peace process.
Yes.
I don't think it can make that anymore. after Trump did what he did on the 7th of September, I don't think Pakistan has that space anymore. Besides, the other question about America bankrolling Pakistan, I think over the years it has been very clear that America has reduced significantly its assistance to Pakistan. What it does want with Pakistan, and as it should,
well, the point I was trying to get at, and let's just open this out very quickly. I'm running out of time, unfortunately.
Sure.
Can we count on America to be a long-term ally in the fight against terror? And I want to bring in Christine Fair here.
So the problem is, and I don't entirely agree with Indrani Bagchi. I'm very glad that Trump walked away from whatever it was on the table, but it doesn't mean that this issue has gone away. So I think one interpretation of John Bolton's departure was that Bolton was the only person that was really putting a roadblock to what Zalmay Khalilzad was trying to do. Rest assured, the Khalilzad crew, they are still beavering away at the State Department, trying to get this back on track. And getting out of Afghanistan is a 2020 election. Like Modi, Trump fetishizes campaign promises. So this issue is not going to go away. So, and I think the other issue that Indrani Bagchi made, which is absolutely spot on, bilateral assistance has declined under Trump, but it was also under decline in the last year of Obama. But the big issue, which is IMF funding, has not gone away. Right. When the United States withdraws its support from for Pakistan at the IMF, that will be a sea change. Now, what they have done, the Americans have, of course, linked FATF, which is this terrorism financial task force, to the IMF. But unless Washington is willing to push for the much-deserved blacklisting, you're not going to see support for the IMF diminish. And the reason for that is what Bharat Karnad said, is that basically Pakistan negotiates with a petting zoo of terrorists in one hand and a bunch of loose nukes in the other. And essentially Pakistan says, I'm too dangerous to fail, basically give me my IMF bailout.
Casey Singh.
So going back to your question about terrorism, the issue emerges is that there are some groups with which the United States and India are complete agreement about what comprises a terrorist group. But the Taliban for the United States has never been designated as a terrorist group. And the reason for that is it was always understood that at some point there would have to be negotiations. And obviously, groups that are most important to India, like Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, these are going to be secondary, if not tertiary, concerns for the United States. So, I think the Americans could also ask, is India a reliable partner in the fight against terrorism? Not my point of view, but I'm going to put that out there, because the Americans are obsessed with Iran. I'm not. I think the Iranian relationship is very important. But for those who are, what I would say, who think Iran is more dangerous than Pakistan, they would argue that India's position with respect to Iran isn't helpful. So I think this kind of question itself is not helpful. What we should be doing as countries is working through our bilateral mechanisms to try to communicate our mutual concerns and try to really focus on those areas where we have the most alignment, while also trying to expand the areas of alignment.
Okay, very quickly on that point and taking it further, Casey Singh and Jay Panda, we're running out of time. We've got about 5 minutes, I'm being told by the producer. Very quickly, Casey Singh, where do you see the alignment in the next 1 week? There is a bilateral engagement. Where do you think we're going to agree?
Look, I think immediately we'll have to give them something on trade. That's what they're working on.
Okay.
There'll be some announcement. President Trump has said he has an announcement to make. I think that announcement won't be on terrorism. That announcement is probably GSP. Specialized preferences. He may show you some let there. But essentially, I agree with Christine Fair that this is a balancing game. You see, we haven't put all our eggs in the US camp, nor are they going to put all their eggs in your corner. We have to balance this relationship with a relationship with Russia, a relationship also to some extent with China, and then of course Iran comes in. So it's a very complex scenario. So the world exists beyond Pakistan.
Okay.
That's not the end of the problem. And in this balancing, you can play a game with Trump. Trump will play some game with you. But this is just
We're
the
coming
way
back to
it's going to be.
outcomes. Okay, very quickly. Jay Panda, outcomes. Indrani Bakchi, always on the inside, knows what's happening. Outcomes. I'm coming to you. Yes. Jay Panda, outcomes.
Very quickly, the way to describe how America treats Pakistan is that it occasionally humors it and throws a few crumbs because of Pakistan's location, the geography which allows access to Afghanistan. But it's no longer the kind of strategic relationship that used to prevail during the Cold War. And regarding India, there has been some sense that it's transactional and not long-term. But transactional and long-term can go hand in hand. They are not necessarily opposed. There are things that India has to give, and there are things that the US has to give that meet our immediate requirements.
Sure.
We are indeed the largest purchasers of defense equipment. And trade, certainly I expect that there will be some breakthrough on the trade front if you've listened to what Piyush Goyal has been saying, our commerce minister. And as far as the long term is concerned, the relationship and the rapport between the president and the prime minister will help set things. But the long term will be defined because of mutual interests.
Okay.
And I believe that mutual interests are much more aligned with, with a few pockets of areas where we will have disagreements, and that's fine.
Okay, outcomes.
Trade, I think we'll have an agreement on trade.
Okay.
It's probably like a mini trade agreement, which will sort of resolve the outstanding issues that we have right now. I think we might have a give on GSP, although frankly, I think a trade deal will cover it. That, in my view, would be the biggest thing that we will get in this visit.
Okay.
Apart from the big convergences on the Indo-Pacific, we will have the first ever foreign ministers meeting of the Quad countries, and that's a big one.
That's a big one. Amy Kasmin, very quickly on the outcomes. What are you putting your money on?
Look, I think trade is a really important issue. Actually, India and the US have to make some kind of progress on resolving their trade differences. The fact of the matter is that there are many powerful and influential business groups in America that are rather frustrated with India's business and economic climate and what they see as barriers to trade. I think, Trump, as we all know from watching his engagements with other countries, has a serious bee in his bonnet on trade. India has not wanted to give much on trade, which is why the Modi got, a not very welcome re-election present with Trump, yanking these GSP preferential access to the market just days after he, kind of was re-elected. I think actually to kind of keep the relationship on track, some kind of progress and mutually satisfactory progress has to be made on trade, and I think that will happen because I think India realizes that needs to happen, because if things don't get better, they're going to get worse.
Okay, we leave it at that. I think it's been a fairly engaging discussion. There was still a lot of ground to cover. I'd flagged 6 issues, we only touched 3. So this is a big engagement with lots of facets. We leave it at that. Thank you very much.